Nobody wants to hear anything from your new album.
Like watching his shows. I think it's quite fun, and I enjoy watching him.
Yes, I
performing.
enjoy watching him, but his voice is...
He moved like fire, but listened like a monk. For over 6 decades, Mick Jagger has been rock and roll's greatest showman. The strut, the lips, the voice that could seduce and snarl in the same breath. But beneath the swagger lived something quieter. A student, a collector of sound, a man who never stopped paying attention. Mick did not invent rock and roll. He absorbed it.
Rock and roll's gotten to such a weird thing now because so many people analysing it. And
he learned from the bluesmen, the poets, the rebels who came before. He studied their records like sacred texts. He borrowed their fire and made it his own. And through it all, he remained a fan, not just of his own legend, but of the music that built him. These 7 albums were not just favorites, they were teachers. Each one carved a piece of his soul, shaped his voice, sharpened his instincts. From the raw electricity of Chicago blues to the polished rebellion of punk, these records whispered truths that stadiums could never shout.
His record, in a way, this record was made all in the room with the musicians in the room. You know, so we're all in the room, Ronnie, me.
Mick Jagger became an icon, but these albums made him human first. Here are the 7 rock albums Mick called essential, and the quiet reasons why they mattered. 7. After School Session. Before Mick, there was Chuck. And without Chuck, there might never have been a Rolling Stone.
Back in the classroom, open your books. Gee, but the teacher don't know how mean she looks.
Released in 1957, After School Session was not just an album. It was a blueprint. Chuck Berry did something no one else had done. He made the guitar tell stories. He turned 3 chords into poetry. He sang about cars and girls and teenage rebellion, but underneath, he was documenting a generation waking up. Mick heard it, and everything changed. He was just a kid in Dartford, dreaming small. Then Chuck Berry's voice came through the radio like lightning. It was not just the sound, it was the attitude, the confidence, the way Chuck owned every note without apology. Mick once said, "Chuck taught me that rock and roll was not about being perfect."
I like his voice. It's a funny
Yes.
voice, you know, it's
Yeah.
like a voice that's never been one of the great tenors of...
It was about being present. That lesson never left him. Tracks like School Days and Too Much Monkey Business were not polished. They were alive. The guitar riffs cut sharp and clean. The lyrics moved fast, packed with detail and wit. Chuck did not waste a single word. He wrote like a man who knew time was short and stories were long. Mick absorbed that economy, that sharpness, that refusal to bore anyone, ever. Berry was a showman too. He did the duck walk. He grinned at danger. He made performance look like freedom. Mick watched and learned, not to copy, but to understand. Rock and roll was not just sound. It was a movement. It was a theater. And Chuck Berry was the first actor on a stage that would never go dark. 6. Electric Mud. This one was sacred, not because it was perfect, because it was dangerous.
I can see by the way you baby talk.
Released in 1968, Electric Mud was a risk. Muddy Waters, the king of Chicago blues, went electric in ways that shocked purists. He added fuzz, feedback, and psychedelic edges. Some hated it. Mick loved it. He called it the blues refusing to die quietly.
Different approach, different feeling of entertainment. You know, it's a different kind of entertainment than the kind of pop singers that...
The Rolling Stones took their name from a Muddy Waters song. That alone tells you everything. Muddy was the foundation, the bedrock. Without him, there is no British blues invasion. No Stones, no Led Zeppelin, no Cream, just silence where thunder should be. Mick knew that debt and never forgot it. Electric Mud was controversial because it was not nostalgic. Muddy did not try to preserve the past. He dragged it into the present, kicking and screaming. The guitars were loud and distorted. The rhythms were hypnotic and heavy. It sounded like the blues had been set on fire. And for Mick, who had just released Beggar's Banquet, that fearlessness mattered. Muddy was in his 50s, still taking risks, still evolving. Tracks like I Just Want to Make Love to You and Manish Boy had been around for years. But here, they felt reborn. Rougher, rawer. Electric Mud proved that tradition did not mean stagnation. It meant survival. Mick understood that you could honor the past without living in it. You could respect the blues and still make it scream. 5. Revolver. They were not enemies, they were mirrors. When Revolver dropped in 1966,
Can laugh about, I feel good in a special way.
the Beatles were no longer just a pop band. They had become architects of sound. And Mick, competitive to his core, paid attention. He did not resent their genius. He respected it.
Who are the greatest, the Stones or the Beatles?
I don't care.
No?
I think it's an irrelevant question.
Yeah.
And respect, for Mick, always meant one thing: raise your game. Revolver was a turning point. The Beatles stopped chasing the crowd and started chasing the impossible. Eleanor Rigby had no guitars. Tomorrow Never Knows sounded like a prayer from another dimension. The Taxman had a bite, for no one had heartbreak. Every song took a risk. Mick once said, "They made us all look lazy." And that was good for everyone. The Stones and the Beatles pushed each other without ever saying so. When the Beatles released Rubber Soul, the Stones answered with Aftermath. When the Beatles gave the world Sgt. Pepper's, the Stones delivered their Satanic Majesty's Request. And when Revolver proved that rock could be art, the Stones sharpened their edge, not to copy, but to compete. What Mick admired most was the fearlessness. The Beatles were the biggest band in the world, and they still experimented, they still reached. Revolver was proof that success did not mean safety. It meant freedom to fail. And for Mick, that was the greatest lesson. Do not give the audience what they expect. Give them what they did not know they needed. 4. Live at the Apollo. This was the sermon. Released in 1963, Live at the Apollo was not just a concert recording. It was a religious experience captured on vinyl. James Brown did not perform, he was possessed. And Mick, watching from across the ocean, understood something essential. Performance was not about singing, it was about belief. Mick had rhythm, he had charisma. But James Brown had something else. Discipline, precision, control disguised as chaos. Every move was rehearsed, every scream was calculated, and yet it felt like spontaneous combustion. Mick studied that paradox. He learned that great performance was not wild. It was surgical. It was knowing exactly when to explode and when to hold back. Live at the Apollo opens with an introduction that feels like a coronation. The crowd is already screaming before James even appears. And when he does not waste a second. Lost Someone stretches for over 10 minutes. It builds and breaks and builds again. James collapses. The cape comes out. He recovers. The audience loses their minds. Mick watched that and thought, this is theater. James Brown taught Mick that the stage was sacred ground. You did not walk on it casually. You did not phone it in. Every night was the last night. Every show was the only show. That work ethic, that relentless commitment became Mick's religion. He carried it into every Rolling Stones concert for the next 60 years. 3. Highway 61. Revisited Dylan did not just write songs, he rewired the brain.
He's gonna say that way down Highway 61.
When Highway 61 Revisited came out in 1965, rock and roll suddenly had literature embedded in it. Words mattered. Not just melody, not just rhythm. Words. And for Mick, who had always leaned on swagger over substance.
Do you like Bob Dylan?
Yes, I do like Bob Dylan.
Well, he's over 16. I quite like watching.
Dylan was a reckoning. Like a Rolling Stone opens the album like a punch to the chest. 6 minutes of venom and poetry. It was not a love song. It was a eulogy. Dylan was angry, cryptic, untouchable. Mick heard it and realized the bar had been raised. You could not just sing about girls and cars anymore. Not after Dylan. You had to mean something, or at least sound like you did. Highway 61. Revisited was electric in every sense. Dylan had gone full rock, and the folk purists hated him for it, but Mick understood the courage that took. Dylan did not care about approval. He cared about the truth. And truth, Mick learned, was more important than applause. The album was messy, surreal, brilliant. Desolation Row stretched for 11 minutes and never got boring. That was power. Dylan never explained his lyrics. He left them open, wild, mysterious. Mick admired that refusal to simplify. Rock and roll did not have to be obvious. It could be a puzzle. It could make you think while you danced. Highway 61. Revisited proved that intelligence and rebellion were not opposites. They were partners. 2. What's Going On? This was Grace Under Fire. Released in 1971, What's Going On was not loud, it was not aggressive. But it was a protest.
Picket lines and picket signs.
Marvin Gaye took pain and wrapped it in beauty. He sang about war, poverty, and injustice, but he did it with strings and sweetness. Mick called it the most honest album ever made because it did not scream. It ached. The Stones had always flirted with politics. Street fighting man, gimme shelter. But they did it with edge and danger. Marvin did it with soul. What's Going On was gentle and devastating at the same time. The title track floated like a question no one wanted to answer. Mercy. Mercy Me felt like mourning. Inner City Blues was a prayer for the broken. Mick listened and realized the protest did not need to be loud. It just needed to be real. What struck Mick most was the production. It was lush, layered, cinematic. Strings swirled, saxophones cried. Marvin's voice doubled and tripled, harmonizing with itself. It sounded like a man having a conversation with his own soul. And that vulnerability, that willingness to be soft in a hard world, impressed Mick. Strength was not always volume. Sometimes it was restraint. What's Going On proved that rock and soul were not separate. They were siblings. Both could carry weight. Both could change minds. Mick never tried to sound like Marvin, but he carried the lesson. Music could be beautiful and still tell the truth. 1. London Calling Full Circle. Released in 1979, London Calling was the sound of a new generation refusing to bow. Punk had arrived, angry and raw, and the Clash, sharper than the rest, built something that honored the past while kicking down its doors. Mick, now in his mid-30s, could have resented them. Instead, he celebrated them. London Calling was not just punk, it was everything. Reggae, rockabilly, ska, soul, all smashed together with fury and intelligence. The title track opened like a warning siren. The guitars were jagged. Joe Strummer's voice was a shout from the streets, but underneath the chaos was structure, discipline. The Clash were not just angry, they were thoughtful. And Mick respected that. What impressed Mick most was their ambition. The Clash did not want to be the biggest band. They wanted to be the most important band. They sang about unemployment, racism, war, and identity. They did not preach. They documented. The Train in Vain was heartbroken. Clamp Down was resistance. The album felt alive, urgent, necessary. Mick had spent decades making people move. The Clash made people think while they moved. London Calling reminded Mick why he started. Not for fame, for freedom. The Clash proved that rock and roll was not dead. It had just changed shape. And for Mick, who had been called a relic by some, this album was proof that influence was not a one-way street. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher was still learning. Mick Jagger never stopped being a fan. Behind the legend was a listener. These 7 albums were not just music. They were mirrors. They showed him where he came from and where he could go. Greatness is not born. It is borrowed, bent, and made into something new. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more stories hidden between the lines of music history.